Okay, let's talk about phenotype and genotype. So the first thing we want to do when we approach words in biology is to really dissect that word and think about defining the components of it, and that will inform us about what the word means. So phenotype and genotype, they both contain this word part type, which should just tell us we're talking about a category, or it might reflect a pattern. Okay, the phenotype, pheno means physical characteristics. So here we're talking about how an organism looks, its morphology. And by the way, before we really understood genes, this is all we had to go on when we were classifying organisms. Since about the middle of the 20th century, however, since the technology for electron microscopes has developed, we have now a whole new world of biology called genetics. And this is our understanding of the genotype that reflects those physical characteristics. The genotype, your DNA, was not visible to the first scientists who conjured their possibility. Rosamond, Franklin, and Watson and Crick, they could not actually see DNA. However, they understood how it worked, and they had very insightful discoveries. Then, several years later, we were actually able to see DNA through a microscope. So here we have two ways that we can identify biological organisms, and they are related. And I want to take you through a slideshow and show you some common illustrations of phenotype versus genotype. So in your laboratory experience, you'll likely be considering phenotype and genotype in terms of human subjects, i.e. your family members. Here are my children, Graham and Althea. And as you can see, they look quite similar. However, they are different. They share genotype with my husband and I, but they are their own people. And that phenotype is delivered through a combination of genetic information and environmental stimuli. So let's look at another example. Here in the Colorado mountains, we have a lot of the subalpine life zone. And this is about 9,000 feet to 11,000 feet. And this ecosystem is characterized by blanketing evergreen forests of few species. There are maybe 6 to 10 species total of evergreens in Colorado. So all of these trees do not share the same genotype. However, all of the individuals of the same species in the same area likely have very similar genotype. And the morphology of this plant informs this. So conifers have heavy seeds that drop below the parent plant. They are not carried by the wind. Therefore, the offspring, the young trees right below the old trees, are likely of very similar genotype to the trees around them. Now let's look at something different. Let's look at the phenotype in terms of what the trees look like, not necessarily whether the individuals right near each other are genetically similar. Why evergreen? Let's ask that question. Well, we know from living here that this is a very harsh climate. It's winter for a lot of the year. The sun drops low in the southern sky in the winter. Solar radiation on the northern slopes might be limited. It's very steep, therefore moisture runs off. There is also very little soil development due to this steep slope. Therefore, these trees are existing in a very harsh environment. And one adaptation to that harsh environment is the development of a needle. A needle lasts as a photosynthesizing organ for 6 to 8 years, in contrast to a leaf, which requires a great deal more calories and energy, but dies and falls off the tree in 1 year's time. So it is more efficient to produce needles. Therefore, in these harsh high altitude conditions, we often see trees with needles, conifers. And this coniferous existence is an example of phenotype, a phenotype that has led to survival generation after generation. Now let's look at another species. In the most favorable spots in the Colorado mountains, we will see aspen trees, and these are the only deciduous trees that you will likely see. So as we just mentioned, making a leaf is not as efficient as a needle. So this organism has a different pathway for survival in this harsh environment. Notice how all of these trees in this stand are changing to this same beautiful orange color. And on the right side, they're kind of turning to a reddish color. So this isn't showing us that they have a very similar phenotype. And we can imply that that is related to their similar genotype. Okay? Why and how do they have a similar genotype? Well, aspens, in fact, have a vegetative reproductive schema. So essentially, they grow by their roots. All of these stems are connected by rhizomes, roots underground that send up shoots. So all of these aspen trees are actually part of one organism. And you can see this very large tree in the middle is probably the mother plant, the oldest stem. Now, this is one adaptation to deal with this harsh environment, because if one stem, say this stem over here, suffers some pathogen or blight, or moose rubs on it too much and it starts to die, the whole organism will not die, and that reflects survival. So this schema has, among other things awesome and cool about aspen trees, is one reason why aspens are persisting in this harsh environment. And this is an expression of their phenotype. And again, we say that surviving is what promotes the genotype from generation to generation, but what helps you survive is your physical characteristic, your behavior, and the products of your behavior. For example, the nest or den that an animal builds. So let's look at another example. Now we're looking at the alpine environment at the very top of our Colorado mountains. And one thing you'll notice right away is that the plants are very, very short. There's diversity there, which might not be reflected in this landscape photo. However, there are several different species of plants, however, they can't manage to grow higher than 6 inches. And this also reflects the struggle for survival in the alpine environment. It is extremely windy, and therefore it is very dry, even though the snow does fall there first. And the growing season is less than 30 days. So a plant has less than 30 days, and an animal for that matter, to complete the reproductive process. Therefore, very few calories can be spent in energy on biomass. These plants are small. Now, in contrast, here is a subalpine meadow. This is probably even in the montane, down at about 8,000 feet. This wildflower field contains the same exact species that were in the previous photo. However, these plants are anywhere from 1 to 2 feet tall, sometimes waist high when conditions are right. And what you can notice here is that this is a more protected environment. We're not at the top of the slope. All the water that is running down from this alpine environment is sliding down into these plants, helping them to grow larger. So here, these genotypes might be very similar to the genotypes of the species in this picture, but they are far larger in biomass because more resources have fallen near them. Now let's look at one more example. So we have several gardeners in the class, and I thought you would appreciate this. Ladybugs Migrate. And this is a picture I took hiking in Boulder, actually. But I've seen similar sights in my house because we release ladybugs inside our house in the winter. When we bring our plants inside, aphids hatch out of the soil, and ladybugs eat insects. They eat aphids, not plants, so they're a beneficial insect. What I want you to appreciate here, or you could appreciate it in my windowsills, is that although these ladybugs are very similar, they share a similar genotype, they all look different. Each one is unique, like a snowflake. And this variation is a reflection on the genetic variation in every single organism. So even though we're talking about genotype reflecting phenotype, we also need to remember that that genotype is not static. It is a product of survival in the environment, and it is also a product of chance. We'll read about several ways that DNA can be mistranslated when copied. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this lecture, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.